Ambassador Khalilzad, welcome back to the NewsHour. The Taliban across Afghanistan have seized dozens of districts. The Afghan army is ceding ground and in some places surrendering. And Afghan government cohesion is weakening. As you know, each of those variables existed before the U.S. announced this withdrawal, but all of those variables are accelerating. Given that, how do you justify the decision to withdraw?
Well, the withdrawal is based on an agreement that was signed almost 2 years ago. And that agreement had a timeline for withdrawal as part of a package that also included commitments by the Taliban not to attack the United States forces after the signing, to cooperate, not to allow the Afghan territory to be used by terrorists threatening the United States or our allies, and the start of inter-Afghan negotiations for a new government, as well as a ceasefire. So the withdrawal was expected. It could have been made conditional based on reaching an agreement and a ceasefire, but ultimately the president decided that it's best to conclude the withdrawal of our forces and encourage the Afghans, support the government to reach a negotiated agreement, because we don't see a military solution to the problem.
We'll talk about the political negotiations in a second, but I want to ask, that withdrawal is imminent, other than the U.S. troops that will stay at the airport and to guard the embassy, and yet there is still no finalized plan on how to maintain the Afghan Air Force, no finalized plan on how to secure the Kabul airport, no finalized plan on U.S. military support from neighboring countries. Why not?
Well, we are working to address all of those issues. There is progress in securing an agreement with countries such as Turkey to secure the airport. We are still there, so that has to be in place before we are completely out of there militarily, which will be in September, based on what the president has announced. Two, we're also working with the Afghans to make sure they have the contracting services that they need to maintain their Air Force, and we're committed to achieving that too before September. So we're dealing with those two issues and more. We're also reorganizing our counterterrorism posture to have the access and the presence needed to monitor the situation in Afghanistan and to be able to strike terrorist targets should that be necessary.
So on that peace agreement, the Taliban are winning on the battlefield. Is the political process dead until the Afghan army can make gains, or frankly, the Taliban are at the gates of Kabul?
Well, of course, there are alternative futures. And the best outcome would be to start negotiations now. The Talibs have to know, and we have said that to them, that if they take over Afghanistan by force, they will forgo what they say they want, which is recognition and support and legitimacy. And we also believe that the war will not end with the Taliban advances, because other Afghans will resist them. There is the possibility that rather than two organized forces right now, the government and the Taliban negotiating, that with the organization of new militias that are taking place, the situation could get more complicated. Rather than two organized forces negotiating peace, there could be a multiplicity of forces that could emerge as a result, making negotiations that much more difficult, increasing the prospects for a long war and for Afghanistan's neighbors to come in on different sides, and thus repeating the situation as was the case in the 1990s, as you know, after the Soviet departure.
The Afghan government says that negotiation with the Taliban that you mentioned earlier, that called for the original withdrawal of U.S. forces by May the 1st, 2021, they say that that sidelined the Afghan government and gave leverage to the Taliban. You were at the time under incredible pressure from President Trump to withdraw U.S. forces from Afghanistan. But in retrospect, didn't the Taliban pocket U.S. concessions and never waver from their desire to advance on the battlefield?
Well, I mean, the Taliban were not going to negotiate with the government before reaching an agreement with the United States. It would have been better, of course, if they had negotiated with the government, but 18, 19 years had passed and that did not happen. So our agreement, in fact, with the Taliban opened the door for historic inter-Afghan negotiations, meaning the Talibs and the government sitting across the table. For the first time in 40 years of war in Afghanistan that happened. Besides, of course, the Talibs agreed in terms of U.S. interest not to attack us after we had signed the agreement, but give us the right to come to the defense of the Afghan forces, which was extraordinary that they would have agreed to that, but they did. And as our forces have withdrawn, they haven't so far, thank goodness, attacked those forces. But both sides need to be realistic. They need to find a solution that works for Afghanistan. There is great pessimism that maybe Afghans would not come to an agreement, but I hope that's not the case, because that would be a tragedy if they don't come to an agreement and the long war becomes even longer and Afghanistan's gains that have been made, the opportunities that have been provided by the United States and our allies would be put at risk.